Okay, we are here with Coach Don Patterson talking about Georgia-Bama, the national championship game, which is set to begin in about 30 minutes as we release this at 6:30 p.m. Central Time here on Monday, January 10th. And Don, the end of an exciting college football season is upon us, but the biggest game of the season is also upon us. And we're going to talk about the top 5 parameters essential to victory this evening, because last night you and I went through all the ins and outs of this game, and these are parameters that I know you've dug for, and they were quite consequential in the SEC championship game, and so we expect them to be important in the national championship as well, Don. So without further ado, I'll hand you the floor. What are the top 5 parameters essential to victory, starting at the bottom?
Thanks, Corey. To set this up, I just want to give the listeners an idea of what I did. I looked at all 12 regular season games for both teams. I also looked at the semifinal games for both teams. That's a total of 26 games. I looked at all 26 games in terms of 25 different parameters. So that's 650 separate evaluations on these two teams. And then I asked the simple question, did you win the parameter? If so, did you win the game or not? And what I'm looking for is the highest possible winning percentages in combining all 13 games on the part of Alabama and combining those with all 13 games with Georgia. And then and only then was I going to turn my attention to the SEC championship game. After doing that, 5 parameters stood out. And here are the records that support those 5 parameters. Tied for 4th would be red zone scoring success. And let me explain what red zone scoring success is. It's the NCAA definition. It simply means you've snapped the ball on or inside the plus 20-yard line. And the plus 20 means you're going in for hopefully a touchdown. And the NCAA asks, did you score or not? It's simply a percentage. That's silly to do it that way. I've never done it that way. The way I figure it, you either score 6, score 3, or score none. And if you're taking a knee at the end of the game and you got the game won, NCAA says that's a failure. I don't count it. It's silly to count it. And after all that, you come up with an average on those possessions. To give you an idea of how the game went, first time around, Georgia was in the red zone 5 times. They failed twice. They threw an interception in the red zone. They failed on downs in the red zone. They ended up with a total of 15 points, 2 touchdowns and a field goal on those 5 possessions, 3.0 per opportunity. At the same time, Alabama was there 3 times, scored 2 touchdowns and 1 field goal. That equates, of course, to 5.0 per possession. They were more efficient in the red zone with their offense than Georgia was with theirs. Hence the win for them in terms of red zone scoring success. It's been a really reliable indicator for winning all season in the Big Ten. It didn't surprise me that it had a high ranking within the matchup of these two teams. Incidentally, the record in those 26 games was 21 wins and 3 losses if you won on red zone scoring, 88% win. Moving on, the other parameter tied for 4th would be edge on explosive plays. Explosive plays is simply my definition of explosive plays, and I try to make it simple for me. It's any play that gains 20 yards or more in the course of the game. Doesn't matter if it's run or pass. To give you an idea of how that played out over their 26 games, if you had an edge on explosive plays, your record was 21-3, 88% win again. Looking specifically at Georgia and Alabama, Georgia had 4 plays that produced big yardage over 20 yards. Alabama had 7. But to put it all in perspective, those 7 plays for Alabama were worth 254 yards. Meanwhile, Georgia's 4 explosive plays were worth 122. Significant edge, of course, to Alabama. Hence another win for Alabama in the category of explosive plays. Let's move on now, Corey, to those that are tied for 2nd. And I think you've got rushing yardage first. Is that right?
Edge on rushing.
Edge on rushing yardage. Edge on rushing yardage over the 26 games. If you had an edge on rushing yardage, your record was 23-3, 88% win again. Amazingly enough, Georgia outrushed their opponent in all 13 games. Obviously, the 3 failures all came to Alabama. But when they went head-to-head, again, Alabama had an edge. Only a slight edge, Corey. It was 115 versus 109. But you got to realize Alabama achieved 115 yards on fewer rushing attempts than Georgia. 26 attempts, that's 4.4 per carry compared to Georgia's average of 3.6. That's pretty impressive because you're doing that against what everyone would agree is the best defense in college football. And of course, it gave them all kinds of opportunities to throw the ball since they didn't spend a lot of time wasting running plays. 26 productive run plays, which left them with 44 pass attempts, and we'll get to the effect on the passing on total offense here in a minute. The other parameter that's tied for second is edge on total offense. I think you just have it labeled maybe as total offense.
Total offense, yep.
That's fine. And again, it's the record of 23-3 in those 26 games, 88% win again. What's amazing when you look at the matchup in the SEC championship game, Alabama won 536 versus 449. A significant edge in total offense. How were they able to do that? In large part because they threw for 421 yards. That averaged to 9.6 yards per attempt. Very efficient pass offense, especially when you factor in no picks. So a very, very productive night for Alabama in terms of pass offense, which resulted in a win on total offense. And then last but not least, all alone in first place would be second quarter scoring. And in that regard, the record in those 26 games is 24-2. Again, Alabama was 13-0 in their games. So the only team that fell short a couple of times, did I say Alabama? I meant Georgia was 13-0. Alabama was 11-2 for a combined record of 24-2. That's 92% win. And if we look specifically at the SEC championship game, Georgia not only won second quarter scoring, they won decisively, 24 points versus 14 points. So there's plus 10 just in the second quarter alone. And it doesn't surprise me that second quarter scoring works out to be most important of the four quarters because, as you know, Corey, it's happened that way in the Big Ten also. I think that's pretty common for most conferences that second quarter scoring is actually the most important quarter in winning the game. So that gives you some idea of the background. What's amazing is, as you recall me saying, that's an indication that Alabama won all five of those parameters. And yet when you looked at that individual matchup, Alabama versus Georgia, Alabama won 13 parameters, Georgia won 11. Like you would expect, it was very evenly divided. And yet the ones that mattered the most, all five of those went in Alabama's favor. So the obvious question looking at tonight, how's it going to change tonight? I would suggest to you, if it's 5-0 in favor of Alabama, you're going to get a very similar result to what you got 5 weeks ago. I don't expect that to happen. I would expect that it's going to be 3-2. Somebody's going to have 3, someone's going to have 2. And at that point, you'll be back to a one-score game, probably a game that's decided toward the end of the game. That's what I hope for. That's what our viewers would like to see tonight is a really, really competitive game. I do think these are the best two teams in college football. That's debatable, of course, in some circles, but their record speaks for themselves. It's impressive what they've been able to do. Now, think about this. Put yourself in Georgia's shoes tonight. I would fully expect Georgia is going to try to find some ways to force the issue. They're going to try to find some ways to make a young quarterback uncomfortable. I think they proved 5 weeks ago they can't show up and run their base defense and play a lot of zone coverage and get that done because they got sliced up pretty good in that SEC championship game. So I would fully expect Georgia in one way or another to try to find a way to pressure young Bryce Young. And how are they going to do that? Obviously, the easy way to bring extra rushers is to play man coverage. I think you're going to get some of that more than what Georgia would play against any other opponent. And I think beyond that, you might see some zone blitz. As you know, with zone blitz, maybe you're still rushing 4, but it's not the 4 that they expect you to rush. In that regard, you can still play zone coverages in behind some zone blitzes. And now an offensive tackle's taking a pass set versus air while the back's having to block a 240-pound linebacker. So that's a good way to go, too. I don't know that Georgia will do that, but it wouldn't shock me if Georgia does a little bit of both. One way or the other, they got to find a way to make Bryce Young uncomfortable. And he was far too comfortable 5 weeks ago. And one other comment, if you can make him uncomfortable, obviously you're going to force him maybe into making mistakes that he normally does not make. And mistakes, as you know, Corey, so often turn into turnovers. If Georgia can have an edge on turnovers, again, the odds of them winning the game do go up, as you know. For the record, Alabama was +2 on turnovers the first time they played. But here's the rest of the story on Alabama. The one team that beat Alabama this season, Texas A&M, also won on turnovers versus Alabama. Georgia needs to find a way to win on turnovers too. If they do that and they win the other 5 parameters, it's going to be one-sided for Georgia. Again, I don't expect that, but that's the reality, and that's the value of these particular parameters. It matters a lot that you win them. They're more important than so many others.
And Don, you brought up edge and explosive plays. If again Alabama decides to play more man coverage, this could be possibly, I would think, an even more important parameter than maybe tied for 4th. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. I remember as one coach said years ago, talking about bringing pressure and playing man. He said, "Well, I promise you this: somebody's band is going to play.
Yeah,
you're either going to get to him and have a negative play for the offense, or they're going to be able to protect, and the ball goes out to a receiver in space. That entire defense is not even aware that the ball's being caught, of course, because their focus is on the guy that they're covering. And that's how you end up with a lot of big plays versus man coverage, if you can engineer those plays. And I promise you this, Bill O'Brien is the offensive coordinator at Alabama. He has a great idea of how to beat man coverage. I don't know how much they worked on it. I can promise you they have a good idea of what to do. The only question is when it happens tonight, if it happens tonight, who executes better? Does Georgia do a better job of covering receivers and bringing pressure? Or does Alabama do a better job of picking up the blitz and finding the open receiver and finding that matchup that is really, really in your favor? The beauty of attacking man coverage, of course, all you're looking for is one really good matchup in your favor, and that's the one you go after.
And Coach, just one final note before we head off, and of course people are getting primed for this game here in a few minutes, but second quarter scoring, I know I can speak for a lot of fans. This is nothing new to you because the Big Ten, I believe in 2020, second quarter scoring was a very, very influential parameter, if you will. Just quick, can you explain why this? Most people perceive the first and fourth quarter, maybe even the third quarter, because you're fresh out of halftime, you get some momentum. Why is second quarter scoring, at least from a fan's perspective, some people would think that second quarter scoring would be the least important, but it's not.
I remember one time doing a report for Bill Snyder when he was at Kansas State. I jokingly said, you always see players hold up 4 fingers at the start of the fourth quarter, right? I said, here's the reality. Most of the games are settled before the fourth quarter ever starts. So, yeah, if the game's tied up after 3 quarters, obviously the fourth quarter makes all the difference. But so often the game gets settled much earlier than that. And typically it's the second quarter, and I'll explain why. Coach Ferentz said, I'm surprised that first quarter does not reflect like second quarter does in terms of picking a winner. And I said, I think the reason why, if you're the underdog to start a game, sometimes you give the favorite a lot of different looks that he doesn't expect, that team doesn't expect. And maybe you have success in the first quarter, but then what happens with any good coaching staff, they adjust to what you're doing. And now in the second quarter, they have a plan to deal with what you did to them in the first quarter. And that's why typically the better team wins the second quarter and so often, of course, goes on to win the game. You can fool a team maybe for 1 quarter, but it's hard to fool them for 4.
Absolutely. So, Coach, first of all, Coach Patterson, it's been a pleasure to discuss this game, and I know I will be soaking it all in because we know that there's a long period of time for us as fans. I know football coaches, you never stop working, but there's going to be a long 8 to 9 month period of time where we have no football. So I know that people who are watching right now appreciate this information. And again, a reminder to everybody, the national championship starting here in just a few minutes on ESPN, 7 p.m. Central Time, Alabama and Georgia. And then, of course, a live post game here at the Voice of College Football following the game. Coach, it's been a pleasure, and enjoy the end of what has been a very memorable college football season.
Thank you, Corey. My goal tonight was simply to try to find a way to make the game a little more enjoyable for the listeners. I think if they understand all these parameters and the effect they have on the game, it certainly makes the game a little more interesting than what it already is.